On the day the news of actress Loki's death was announced, Caleb, the top star in the music industry, jumped off the high platform at his concert. Before dying, he said that he would sacrifice his life for his first love. Following Caleb's fall were also the proposal posters that he and I were about to make public. The torn pieces of paper fluttered in the air, like a grand funeral sacrifice. When I opened my eyes again, I had also gone back 10 years. This time, I wouldn't have a secret crush on Caleb anymore. I wouldn't stay up late watching him practice the piano anymore, nor would I pretend to be someone else to write him private messages of comfort. On the day I went abroad for an exchange program, I blocked all his contact information and cancelled my long silent Weibo mini account. As the plane took off, I took one last look at the ground and then told myself, if I can't have your love, then so be it. This time, I'll set you free. The last memory of my previous life was at Caleb's concert. The 3-hour performance was coming to an end. On the stage, Caleb was holding the old guitar from many years ago and was lifted to a high place by the lifting platform. After clearing his throat, he approached the microphone. The last song is for the person I love the most in my life. Whether it was the heavy rain we experienced when we were 17 or the meteors we chased together, they are all memories that I can't forget. If possible, I'm willing to accompany her for the rest of my life. No matter in life or in death. The audience cheered and jeered, and the atmosphere was lively. Everyone knew tacitly that the she in Caleb's words referred to me. My relationship with Caleb wasn't a secret. We had known each other for 10 years and been in love for 5 years. Over the years, no matter what activities Caleb participated in, I was always busy behind the scenes. And he didn't avoid it in front of the media. Even when he was sobbing while receiving an award, he didn't forget to mention my name in his speech. People in the world all like happy ending stories, and I was no exception. So when my agent Luna hinted that there would be a special part tonight and asked me to dress up nicely before coming, I was so excited that I tossed and turned all night and couldn't fall asleep. But at this moment, my heart was beating abnormally fast, and my palms were sweaty. Heavy rain, meteors. Amid the cheers of the crowd, I forced myself to recall desperately, afraid of missing any details of my past interactions with Caleb. These scenes that sounded like they would appear in a youth movie and be remembered for a lifetime. I had absolutely no impression of them at all. Cold sweat soaked my clothes. In a short while, the song came to an end. On the stage, the last guitar notes faded away. The lights and shadows in the whole venue changed. Rose petals shipped from Bulgaria flew in the air along with the fireworks, and transparent balloons rose into the sky. At this extremely romantic moment, Caleb suddenly took the microphone and said, "Life is too short. People are always bound by worldly affairs and forget the original meaning of setting out. Such a life is definitely not what I want." In the last memory, he untied the wire rope and jumped down without hesitation. The people in the inner venue screamed and scattered. In the chaos, I was hit by the fallen stage props. There was a sharp pain in the back of my head. The wedding posters that were supposed to be made public had been torn into pieces at some point. The white paper scraps fluttered in the air all over the sky and the earth, like a grand funeral sacrifice. Before losing consciousness, I remembered. Caleb said sorry at last. When I opened my eyes again, I had gone back 10 years. The sharp pain in the back of my head hadn't completely disappeared yet, and excessive information flooded into my brain. On the playground, I suddenly felt my legs go weak and fell to the ground. Blood gushed out of my nose. The dull pain in my chest came a bit late. After losing consciousness in my previous life, I had a very long dream. In the dream, the scenes changed. I stood from the perspective of an onlooker and watched Caleb's short life, and also glimpsed his hidden love. I saw Caleb wearing a school uniform. His youthful eyes were full of high spirits that hadn't been worn down by reality yet. He smiled gently, and his eyes seemed to be filled with stars. "Loki, I like you. Shall we apply to the same school?" The girl's face turned red, looking surprised and shy. After a long while, she whispered yes. The heavy snow fell on their shoulders, and the street lamp elongated the shadow of their embrace. The love in youth was transparent and pure. Loving someone meant loving them for a lifetime. I saw them fall in love and then be forced to part. I saw Caleb become depressed and decadent. The memories of Caleb flipped through page after page in front of my eyes. Until later, I saw myself. It was the scene when I accompanied Caleb back to his old house when his mother passed away many years later. By then, Caleb and I had been in love for 2 years. There was a locked drawer in Caleb's room, and inside it was an iron box. Although it was rusty, it was obviously carefully stored by someone. "What's inside?" I saw myself turn my head and ask him, gently putting my hand on Caleb's arm. Caleb had a calm expression, with a slight frown between his eyebrows. "Nothing, just some odds and ends left by my mother. Go downstairs and have a rest. I'll tidy up the room." In the scene, Caleb took a deep breath after I left and opened the iron box. Inside were hair ties, vocabulary notebooks, and many, many photos. From the thick photo album, Caleb took out the one at the bottom. The girl wearing the school uniform had a delicate face. She was standing side by side with the boy. The sunlight shone from behind them, and the tree shadows were dappled. In the yellowed photo, Caleb wasn't looking at the camera. Instead, he turned his face to look at her, and the smile on his lips was extremely gentle. His eyes were sincere and passionate, and his love was not concealed at all. Just one look was enough to break me down. I had never seen such a Caleb. I knew Caleb had always been calm. No matter what happened, he would only talk to me about the pros and cons. One year during a heavy rainstorm, my umbrella was stolen and I was forced to stay in the library. Coincidentally, it was also my menstrual period. Helplessly, I called Caleb and asked him if he could come and pick me up. "Go to the convenience store and buy one." Caleb's voice on the other end of the phone sounded particularly calm. He paused for a moment and then added, "I'll transfer you some money. It'll be quicker to buy one." People were coming and going at the convenience store in front of the library. I was standing in front of the empty shelves and was about to say something more. "I'm working overtime tonight." Caleb spoke and interrupted my other thoughts. The music studio where he was interning wasn't actually far from the school. It was only a 15-minute round trip. The words, "I'm having a bad stomachache now," got stuck in my throat. I could only politely say that I was sorry to bother him and then politely said no. After that, I seldom bothered him again. Whether it was moving dormitories after graduation or squeezing on buses and subways everywhere to look for a job, I had gotten used to solving problems by myself. However, I didn't expect that. When Caleb's memories flashed by in front of my eyes, I also saw that rainy day. That day, the music studio where he was interning happened to be responsible for producing the incidental music for Loki's new drama. That day, he finally met the person he had been longing for many years. The girl stood in front of him, and the rain was about to wet her long dress. She smiled gently and said, "It's raining heavily outside. I didn't bring an umbrella. Caleb, could you give me a ride?" Caleb didn't hesitate. In the next scene, the umbrella was swaying in the wind, and their bodies were pressed against each other. The heavy rain quickly soaked their clothes. At the moment when their skins touched, their rationality collapsed. In the deserted alley, they kissed passionately in the rain, pouring out their longing for each other after many years of separation. The heavy rain passed through my transparent body, and I fell to the ground. The belated pain pierced through my heart, and tears silently slid down my cheeks. It turned out that love and non-love had always been clearly distinguishable. My 10 years. From beginning to end, it was nothing but a joke. Thinking about the past made my head ache terribly. In the infirmary, I cried myself to sleep in a daze. When I got home, it was already pitch dark. The moment I pushed the door open and walked in, I almost bumped into the person inside. The familiar smell of pine wood wafted over. It was Caleb. There were many pieces of luggage in the living room. Caleb was busy moving them to the guest room. The headache that had just eased came back with a vengeance the moment I saw him. I leaned against the door frame to keep myself from falling. Soon, someone held my shoulder. "Are you feeling unwell?" Caleb walked up to me in a few steps. Hearing his familiar voice, I subconsciously felt like vomiting. I frowned and pushed his hand away. It was as if my instinct told me that only by keeping away from him could I relieve the pain. Caleb's hand froze in midair, his fingertips slightly paused, and he frowned and said, "Do you have a fever? Why do you look so pale?" He ignored my temper and firmly put his palm on my forehead. The moment our skins touched, I remembered that nightmare. The headache stirred up my nerves. I took a half step back and looked at him coldly. "Who are you?" It seemed that Caleb had also been reborn. Only he probably forgot. Today was the day we first met in our previous life. At this time, we were supposed to be strangers. My mother and Caleb's mother were old friends. Taking pity on Caleb's family's sudden misfortune, with his parents one dead and one injured in a car accident, when Caleb's mother was transferred to a hospital in the province for a brain surgery, he was allowed to stay at my home for a while. When we first met, he was working several part-time jobs. There was always a faint bluish tint under his eyes, and he always seemed sleep-deprived. At that time, to him, I was probably as insignificant as many other people who passed by in his life. So he didn't remember these details. But it didn't matter. It was better that he didn't remember. I looked at him, gritted my teeth, and then said word by word to draw a clear line between us. "I don't like being touched by strangers. Your actions are very offensive to me." Caleb probably didn't expect that I would say such things. His eyes were blank for a moment, and he just looked at me silently. There was only a short distance of 1 meter between us, but it seemed to span 10 years. In the quiet space, his face looked young, but his eyes were no longer the same as before. I suddenly realized that perhaps Caleb had actually changed a long time ago. The person I liked was no longer there. I just never noticed it. My eyes couldn't help but feel sour and swollen. I bit my teeth hard to hold back my emotions, for fear that I would suddenly break down. During the confrontation, Caleb finally spoke. "My mother has been transferred to the Provincial People's Hospital for hospitalization. I may have to trouble you during this period. I heard that you're in Senior 3 now. I'll try my best to stay in the hospital and won't disturb you while you're reviewing." He spoke slowly, as if he was explaining and also seemed to be testing. "But do you really not know me? I'm Chunk. Do we have to know each other?" Before my emotions collapsed, I interrupted his words, took the school bag off my shoulder, and didn't look at him again. "I'm not interested in your affairs. Please step aside and don't block the way." Fortunately, Caleb's cell phone rang. "Are you a family member of Cheng Jingwen? The patient's condition is not good now. Please come to the hospital as soon as possible." The voice on the other end of the phone was extremely anxious. Caleb's hand trembled violently when he hung up the phone. He had just wanted to say something to me, but now he couldn't care about anything else and rushed out in a panic. The moment the door closed, I finally let down my guard. Tears burst out like a flood. I didn't expect the reunion to come so suddenly. The scenes of the previous life were still in front of my eyes, and the bits and pieces of the past uncontrollably emerged in front of me. I thought that maybe my headache was too severe. Otherwise, why couldn't I stop crying? At a certain moment, I really wanted to take off all my disguises and question him about everything in the previous life. But I knew better. Questioning him was meaningless. In this world now, none of those things had happened yet. Rather than getting entangled again, it would be better to cut off all ties from the very beginning. After that headache, it seemed that I had lost a part of my memory. The scene of my first encounter with Caleb was replaced by new memories. I began to hardly remember what Caleb looked like when I first met him in my previous life, nor could I recall what mood I was in at that time. Perhaps even God thought I was pitiful, so everything was brought back to the starting point. Caleb was really living in the hospital as he had said, and I hadn't seen him for a long time. I ate, went home, read books, reviewed, and did numerous mock exams all by myself. During those late nights when I was writing vigorously, I no longer worried about whether Caleb had eaten on time when he had a stomachache, nor did I worry about whether he had taken an umbrella when the weather was bad. I thought that this life would be like this. Until the day when the mock exam results came out. The consecutive days of staying up late had drained all my energy. When I woke up in a daze with my head on the desk, Caleb was right beside me. Awake? Go back to sleep for a while. He spoke in a familiar tone, marking the mistakes on the paper as if he was writing something. The light shone down from above his head, casting a shadow over his eyes. In my previous life, it was probably around this time that I fell in love with Caleb. He had excellent grades. Perhaps to repay my mother's help, no matter how late he got home from work, he would still explain the questions to me. One day, he was so sleepy that he fell asleep on the desk during the intervals when I was solving problems. The evening breeze was gentle, blowing over the pages of the book. Fortunately, this body hadn't completely forgotten the knowledge points. I could recall the blurry examination points after reading them a few times. I stayed up many nights, sorted out and summarized the knowledge points again, and managed to bring my grades back to the previous level before the mock exam. On the night when the results of the third mock exam were announced, I met Loki. The girl was wearing a long dress and standing downstairs of my house. Her long hair was loose and floating in the wind. She was so pretty and eye-catching, almost the same as in Caleb's memory. However, she didn't look happy. She had her hands folded across her chest, and her beautiful eyebrows were furrowed. I've already told you that I'm going to sign up for a tour group to travel during the summer vacation. Are you going or not? A 7-day tour group only costs 8,000 yuan. Can't you afford that? Perhaps because she was in a hurry, her voice sounded a bit shrill. Other people's boyfriends buy them bags and clothes. My boyfriend is good at embarrassing me. If my roommate's boyfriend goes and you don't, then we don't have to continue our relationship. Caleb was standing in front of her, with his back to me. His mother didn't have medical insurance. The hospitalization fee alone was 200 yuan a night, and she needed regular checkups after being discharged from the hospital, which was also a considerable expense. Caleb really had a heavy burden during his college years. At that time, I never dared to ask for anything. I only made a wish to God on my birthday every year, hoping that the person I liked could have a good sleep and wouldn't have to work so hard anymore. It seemed that God had heard my wish. He let Caleb rise to a higher position and be noticed by others. But everything comes at a price. The wind blew over Caleb's thin back and carried his words to my ears. I heard him say, "Okay." The girl's expression instantly became bright, and she smiled and threw herself at Caleb, hugging him. The scene in front of me overlapped with the one in my dream. Hot and wet liquid unconsciously slid down my cheeks, and a headache hit me, getting worse and worse. I didn't continue watching. Anyway, the crying child always gets the candy. Unlike me, who was always quiet and obedient and was always ignored. Perhaps facing Caleb and Loki directly gave me a shock. This headache was even more serious than usual. I tossed and turned in bed. The past and the present were churning and stirring in my mind, tugging at every nerve, as if someone was pulling my memories out of my soul. I curled up into a ball and covered my mouth, not daring to cry out. I desperately comforted myself that once the pain passed, I would forget and be okay. Until the morning sunlight spilled over the windowsill, carrying a faint warmth, brushing over my sweaty cheeks. It made me feel a sense of relief as if I had survived a disaster. I thought that this time, I might really forget Caleb. After the college entrance examination, I walked out of the examination room following the flow of people. Many students were laughing and tearing up their books. The wind blew, and the torn pages of the books and the rose petals on the campus fell together, swirling in the air. The night when I met Loki seemed to have made me forget a lot. I forgot why I had liked Caleb and also forgot those silent unrequited loves. A large part of my soul that had been pulled away became blank and transparent. Even if I saw scenes similar to those in my previous life now, I could control myself and not recall them anymore. I didn't look any further. There were quite a few parents waiting to pick up their children at the entrance of the examination room. I walked straight through the crowd. I knew that my mother wouldn't be among them. My parents divorced when I was very young, and I lived with my mother. She was a lawyer. When she was busy, she couldn't be seen for months, and it was common for her to forget about me. What she often said was, "Imogen, be good. Mommy is busy. Go read books by yourself." So I had been very good and obedient since I was a child. I was as quiet as a mute. When other children were still playing wildly and would only go home for dinner after being scolded by their parents, I already knew how to cook a simple dish and a soup, and then took 2 buses to my mother's workplace. My mother's colleague also said, "Imogen is so good. She has been sensible since she was a child. Unlike my child, who is always a headache every day." The one who spoke was Aunt Lynn. I had met her daughter. She was 1 year younger than me. Whenever she did poorly in an exam, she liked to act coquettishly towards her mother, so Aunt Lynn's raised hand always couldn't bring itself to land on her in the end. At that time, Aunt Lynn was always feeling exasperated. But she didn't know how much I envied her daughter. It was a long time later that I realized that in my failed relationship with Caleb, the influence of my original family could be seen everywhere. I hadn't learned to express my own needs. I stubbornly equated love with giving, thinking that as long as I did more, he should fall in love with me. Over the years, my mother had been extremely meticulous in her work. Every opportunity was hard-won for her. I might not have understood it when I was 18, but when I was 28, I learned to be understanding. I understood my mother's imperfections and the difficulties of adults. At sunrise, I got on the bus heading to the town. The bus swayed as it drove along the country road, like a ship sailing towards the sun. I turned my head and waved, and saw the little old lady secretly wiping her tears again. In life, there are always more partings than meetings. But fortunately, this time I still had a lot of time. I didn't come back until it was almost time for school to start. In this life, I was admitted to Lund University as I wished. The school is located in a coastal city in the south, with very beautiful scenery. I used to take the bus alone to see the sea often. According to my memory, Caleb's mother should have been discharged from the hospital by this time, and Caleb had also moved away from my home. I hadn't had a headache for a long time, and my memories were no longer clear. The moment when our life trajectories intersected in my previous life had been cut off by me personally. The story between Caleb and me should have ended here. After several transfers, it was already evening when I got back. When I opened the door, I saw my mother, whom I hadn't seen for a long time, at the entrance. Her luggage was scattered in the aisle, and there were so many documents that they were almost falling out of her bag, as if she had just rushed here from somewhere. She was dressed in black, with a heavy look of tiredness on her face. Caleb's mother passed away. It happened in the early hours of the morning. She couldn't be rescued. "I'm going to the hospital now." Suddenly, my hand holding the suitcase paused. This was an unexpected variable, completely different from the trajectory in my previous life. In my memory, Caleb's mother was a very kind person. Once, when I helped Caleb deliver something to the hospital, I accidentally saw the large and shocking burn wounds on her body. "Don't let our Imogen be scared." Even though she was the one who was injured, she kept apologizing to me. After being discharged from the hospital, Caleb rented a small house near the school. While working part-time, he took care of his mother. When she heard that Caleb and I were studying at the same university and that the food in our school cafeteria wasn't very good, even though she was not in good health, she always offered to cook for me. I advised her several times, but she always smiled and said, "Auntie can't stay idle. If I sit around all day, my muscles will get stiff. Cooking is just a good way to move around and I'm not tired at all." In the small room, the 3 of us sat around the small table. The food was delicious, giving a feeling of home, full of the warmth of daily life. Until one rainy day, she asked me what I wanted to eat in the evening. "Scrambled eggs with tomatoes will be fine." It was simple ingredients and simple steps. I didn't want to tire her out. But I didn't expect that it would be our last conversation. The continuous heavy rain flooded into the house. Caleb's mother, with her inconvenient body, wanted to use old clothes to block the door but accidentally slipped in the water, hit the back of her head, and lost her breath. When I rushed there, Caleb was crying bitterly. The meal that we couldn't have together was still on the table. At the moment when my memories came back, my mother was standing at the door. "Do you want to come with me?" she asked. I remembered that kind face, so I nodded. In life, we always need to say goodbye properly. In just 2 months, when I saw Caleb again, he had changed a lot. He, who had always been clean and tidy, was sitting blankly in the stairwell, his eyes red and terrifying, stubble growing on his chin, and his hair messy. He looked extremely decadent. When people walked by, he curled up into a ball. His cell phone vibrated as there was an incoming call. Caleb seemed to think of something, and his eyes lit up for a moment. He tremblingly picked up the phone, but the moment he saw the caller on the screen, the light in his eyes quickly dimmed. Caleb didn't answer the call and hung up. But the other side didn't seem to want to stop. After the call was hung up, it kept ringing at an even more frequent rate. Caleb impatiently turned off the phone and threw it aside. At the moment when he closed his eyes, something seemed to fall from the corners of his eyes. The induction light in the stairwell quickly went out. In the darkness, he finally couldn't hold back anymore, and the suppressed sobs sounded, intermittently, reaching my ears. Across half a flight of stairs, I looked up at him. A fine pain spread in my heart, and this pain clearly reminded me that I had once loved him deeply. However, the missing pieces in my brain made it impossible for me to piece together my complete feelings for him. Without the emotions, the remaining memory fragments from my previous life were just stories. The protagonist seemed to be me, but also not me. I didn't go up any further but turned around and went downstairs. I took out my phone again and changed the ticket for going to Lawn City the day after tomorrow to the latest one today. I thought that this was how we should be in this life. There would be no self-assertive comfort or greetings. When we happened to meet by chance, we would just be strangers. We would pass by each other, separate again, and disappear into the crowd, just as he had once hoped. I raised my hand and sent a message to my mother. I found him. He's in the stairwell on the 4th floor of the inpatient department. Since I've already been to Caleb's mother's place, I'll go back first. There are freshman activities at school, and I need to start school early. I'm leaving tonight. The typing on the dialog box lit up and then went out. I didn't know what my mother was thinking about. She hesitated for a long time and finally sent a large sum of money as a transfer. Lawn City is far from home. Let me know if you don't have enough money. Find a nice hotel to stay in these days. I'll come to you after I'm done with things here. At a certain moment, I felt that my mother and I were really similar. We were not good at expressing ourselves. When it came to words related to love, we were always at a loss for words and went around in circles. I thought of the heavy dark circles under her eyes and didn't know how many nights she had stayed up. "Okay," I said. "But don't overwork yourself. Take care of your body." I put away my mobile phone and was about to walk out of the staircase when I saw Loki. The girl was wearing a long dress with floral patterns, and her long hair was tied into a beautiful bun. She was holding her mobile phone, looking as if she was venting her anger on someone. We had agreed to go traveling, but then he said he wouldn't go. Was it really necessary for him to do this just because I said a few words to him outside the ward that day? If anyone should break up, it should be me. Why did he break up with me just like that and even hung up on me? What's the point? I'm just not willing to swallow this anger. The sound of her leather shoes rubbing against the ground made a tapping noise. I withdrew my gaze and didn't look at her anymore. When we passed by each other, however, she stopped me. "Wait a moment." Loki turned around to look at me, with an unfriendly look in her eyes. There was silence in the air, and I didn't plan to stay longer. But when I turned around, she grabbed the corner of my clothes. "I remember now. Aren't you that? You something? This is Caleb's mother's ward. Why are you here?" She looked me up and down, and there was a sudden realization in her eyes. Her tone instantly became sharp with anger. "I see. Did you say something to Caleb? Otherwise, why would he suddenly break up with me for no reason?" "No." Perhaps it had been too long since I last saw someone from the past. Fragments of memories that remained in my mind suddenly emerged and spun around in my head without warning. My brain started to ache after a long time, and my nerves were pulled. I didn't have time to answer, but Loki thought I was avoiding the question. I've long felt that he was acting strange. He wouldn't even let me look at his phone. It seems that he had already hooked up with you a long time ago. That whole brother and sister thing is just disgusting to hear. As if her suspicion had been confirmed, her voice became even more shrill. You're really something for living with someone else in senior year of high school. Are you addicted to being a mistress? Gradually, people gathered around. Those who were watching the fun surrounded the outside of the staircase, and some people were even recording videos with their mobile phones all the time. With people watching, Loki became even more energetic and loudly condemned me in front of the crowd. I endured the pain and forcefully pulled Loki's hand off the corner of my clothes. During the tugging, Loki's hand bumped against the iron door and turned red in a large area. You bitch. She was so angry that she raised her hand to hit me, but I grabbed her hand instead. I endured the pain, gritted my teeth, and said in a voice loud enough for everyone around to hear, Caleb's mother, whom you mentioned, has passed away. It was today. So I came to the hospital to see her off for the last time. As for Caleb, I neither like nor care about him. If you say one more word at random, I'll call the police using the surveillance in the corridor. You? Loki was about to say something else, but she was taken aback when she heard that Caleb's mother had passed away. The surprise in her eyes flashed by. I often went to the library after class. On the east side of the 4th floor, there was a row of seats from where you could see the sea. Listening to the sound of the tides always made me feel at ease. Sunny and I unsurprisingly became good friends. She said that I couldn't always stay cooped up in the dormitory and the library. Since the weather was so nice, I should always go out for a stroll. Don't think I don't know that you secretly cried in your bed a few days ago. Just think about it. After doing the real exam papers, you do experiments. After learning advanced mathematics, you study chemistry. Who could be in a good mood? Life seems so gloomy, right? We're in college, not senior year of high school again. She forcibly dragged me to change clothes and go out, chatting nonstop along the way. It's so nice that our school is by the sea. You can see such a beautiful evening as soon as you go out. It makes you feel so open-minded. You just haven't adapted to the new life yet. College is the time to do some youthful things. Otherwise, when you're old and look back, there will be nothing. What a pity. Sister will take you out to see the world today. The cafe at the school gate has a new resident singer. I heard that he's really handsome and performs every day at sunset. Let's hurry up and grab a seat. She pulled me and ran on the beach, and our feet sank into the soft fine sand. The cafe had rows of light blue sofa chairs placed on the beach. By the time we arrived, quite a few people had already gathered around. The sea breeze blew gently, and the afterglow of the setting sun fell softly, coating everything with a faint golden hue. It was incredibly romantic. Look, that's him. I followed the direction Sunny pointed and saw someone holding a guitar on the stage on the second-floor rooftop. Caleb's appearance suddenly crashed into my eyes. He had cut his hair into a neat short cut, and he had lost a lot of weight. His eye sockets were deeper, his nose was high and straight, and his jawline was sharp. He was lowering his head to adjust the equipment. Some girls around said, "Oh my God, this lead singer is so handsome." Yeah, that's right. I came here just for him. That self-composed song of his last time was so beautiful. I even cried. It said that it was adapted from his own unrequited love experience. It seemed to be called Summer Night or something. Unrequited love? Then did he succeed in winning the person's heart later? I don't know. But if it were me, I would definitely be deeply touched. People kept taking their seats around. Someone reminded him that it was almost time and he could start. Caleb's hand stroked the strings, and the sound of the guitar came from the speakers. In the sky full of rays of light. The setting sun was behind him, about to sink below the sea level. The sea breeze blew up the corners of his clothes, and transparent bubbles were flying around. Time and space seemed to overlap briefly. That song, Summer Night, which was originally supposed to be sung for me, came back to me in such an absurd scene after an interval of a lifetime. He sang with deep emotion, and the familiar words fell into my ears one by one. But Caleb, since it was wrong from the beginning, how could the process be right? Suddenly, there was a heavy note on the guitar in the speakers, and the song that was halfway through stopped. Caleb finally noticed me. He couldn't open his mouth for a long time and gradually his eyes became red. The audience in the audience was confused at first, and then some people shouted at him a few times, asking him to continue. But he didn't continue. His hand holding the guitar was shaking violently, as if he was crying. "Why are you crying, Caleb? What's missed is missed. Everything has already ended. We're doomed not to be able to go back." I pulled Sunny and turned around to leave. "Hey, wait. I just got here." She didn't quite understand and looked back strangely step by step. "I know him. That guy is a cheating scumbag. His girlfriend slandered me as his mistress." I omitted most of the complicated plots of past and present lives and simply explained the whole story to her. The contempt in Sunny's eyes grew deeper and deeper. In the end, she was so angry that she rolled her eyes. "He looks decent, but I didn't expect his character to be so bad. He already has a girlfriend but still insists on flirting with you. You ignored him, but his girlfriend rushed up and said you were a mistress. And she cursed so harshly. What kind of people are they? I really want to punch these two idiots. That's why I don't really want to see him," I said. Sunny patted me on the shoulder. I understand. We'll never come here again. Let's take a detour next time." It had rained several times in a row. In Lawn City in autumn, the temperature dropped earlier than in previous years. The thin sweater couldn't block the cold, and the cold wind kept blowing into my body. After the evening class, there was a crowd of people. I followed the crowd towards the dormitory, but unexpectedly, I saw Caleb downstairs in the dormitory. He was wearing very little, just a thin black windbreaker. He was leaning against the street lamp. His tall and slender figure looked a bit dejected, and the red light at his fingertips flickered on and off. Occasionally, some passing girls would look at him a few times. Caleb didn't raise his head. I walked towards the dormitory along with the flow of people, without looking at him. But when I was about to pass by him, he stopped me. "Imogen." He called me, his voice a bit hoarse. I didn't stop and continued walking forward. "Imogen." He called again, louder than before. "Imogen. Imogen." I ignored him, but he just kept calling me, following behind me, being persistent like a rascal. Until we were almost downstairs in the dormitory. In the crowd, Caleb's appearance was quite conspicuous. Some female classmates recognized him, and their looks at him and me became gossipy. Caleb did it on purpose. I didn't turn around, and he said, "Imogen, be my girl." "Have you said enough?" I finally couldn't bear it anymore and interrupted him, frowning as I looked at him. He seemed to have finally achieved his goal and smiled wickedly. "Let's talk," he said. "We have nothing to." I dropped out of school. He spoke, and our two sentences collided. "I'm planning to retake the exam for another year. I really like this school. Why don't you teach me, senior sister?" He stood at the bottom of the steps and looked up at me. I scolded him, "Are you crazy?" "Well, I'm not in my right mind. Maybe I got my brain damaged." He said those self-deprecating words and then suddenly said something out of the blue. "I broke up with Loki a long time ago. Actually, I don't like her. I just..." "Caleb." I interrupted his words and looked into his eyes. "Stop bothering me. Whether you like or dislike someone has nothing to do with me. Don't come to me again. Don't say such inexplicable things to me. I don't understand what you're talking about." The crowd downstairs was almost gone. The evening breeze in late autumn suddenly blew up, blowing my hair and blocking my eyes. In the hazy sight, I saw Caleb take one step forward, and then another, until his shadow covered me. He reached out, tucked my hair behind my ear, and then bent down beside my ear. "Imogen." He called my name in a low voice. When he spoke again, it was like a whisper from an old lover, "You understand. Don't lie to me." In the evening breeze, There was a smile on his lips, yet his eyes were sad, as if a thick fog of parting was lingering around him. I know you can understand. So let's stop doing this, pretending not to be familiar with each other, pretending not to know each other. Shall we start over? I really, really miss you. I'm sorry for everything. The wind carried his voice to my ears. I looked at him, but clearly felt that the last fragments in my memory were dissipating. Bit by bit, they were breaking into pieces in the evening breeze of late autumn. It's too late, Caleb. It's too late. The person you should truly be sorry to has already disappeared from this world. I'm not her. I won't take a bus for several hours to see you when you're sick. I won't always accompany you silently when you're writing songs. I won't hold you to comfort you when you're sad. I won't have those past experiences with you. And I won't be with you. Before turning around and leaving, I heard myself speak softly. Later, I asked my mother to confirm it. What Sunny said turned out to be true. I really did live under the same roof with that person named Caleb. But how could I have no memory of it at all? At that time, he was busy taking care of his mother in the hospital and didn't often live in our house. He just came over occasionally to wash up. You were busy with classes. Maybe you didn't have much interaction, so it's normal that you don't remember. My mother chatted with me casually while flipping through some materials in her hand. Are you used to the food and accommodation? Do you have enough money? Mom can transfer some more to you. And there's that quite good exchange program that your teacher mentioned at the beginning of the semester. I don't know how your application materials are going. You should pay more attention when you have time. My mother on the other end of the video took off her glasses, with 2 deep marks on the bridge of her nose and dark circles under her eyes. I answered one by one, and finally said, "Got it, Mom. I'm going to turn off the light. You should also go to bed early." The call was hung up before the lights were turned off. I lay on the bed and stared at the ceiling for a while. It was just strange. I remembered that I wasn't very close to my mother when I was a child. I was always a bit afraid of her back then. Since when did our relationship start to improve? I tossed and turned in bed. I felt as if I had forgotten something very important. Or maybe not. Forget it. Maybe as we grow up, we can let go of many things. The next day when I went downstairs, as expected, I saw that familiar figure downstairs. He was sitting by the flower bed. The sea breeze in winter blew his thin clothes, but he seemed to feel no cold. When he saw me, he quickly got up, walked a few steps towards me, and handed me breakfast, as well as new gloves and a scarf. Imogen. He called me. Obviously, I didn't know him, but his voice somehow sounded strangely familiar. Caleb. I called him. You remember? His eyes quickly lit up for a moment, as if he wanted to say something to me.